The Taliban's true face revealed. WION correspondent abducted, detained, assaulted. WION's Anas Malik held for 21 hours at an unknown location. Blindfolded and handcuffed by Taliban fighters. Targeted for reporting attack on al-Qaeda chief. Anas Malik's Kabul associates still in custody. Assault on WION correspondent exposes Taliban 2.0.
We were handcuffed, we were blindfolded, we were hurled accusations of the most wildest in nature.
Watch Anas Malik narrate his experience in Taliban custody. Only on Gravitas, tonight, 9 p.m. IST.
Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post with me, Ghadi Francis, our weekly show from this region that I call home. Our top story today is about a power struggle, a battle for Shiite dominance in a war-scarred nation. I'm talking about Iraq. Sadr supporters are still sitting inside the parliament. The Iraqi cleric is calling for the dissolution of the parliament, and a tussle over new government has further escalated the already fragile political system. So, what does this mean for Iraq and its stability? We tell you.
In Iraq, it is a battle for Shiite dominance. In focus is popular cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Sadr has called for early elections in the war-scarred nation as his protesters continue to occupy the parliament.
Use my presence to end corruption, and all old faces, no matter who they represent, they won't have a place here anymore, by God's will. This is done through a democratic process. Pay attention, please. Through a revolutionary, peaceful, democratic process first. Then a democratic and early election process after dissolving the current parliament.
Sadr wants the parliament to be dissolved. This after polls failed to produce a new government. So what is Sadr's endgame? Is the powerful cleric bluffing? Or could his call see a negotiated end to months of political deadlock? The first question is, why early elections? In Iraq, government formation has always been complex. After the elections in October, Sadr's bloc emerged as the biggest parliamentary faction. But it was still far short of a majority. In June, his 73 lawmakers quit. A bid to break a logjam over establishment of a new government. That led to a rival Shiite bloc becoming the largest in parliament. The pro-Iran coordination framework, a move that angered the Sadrists across Iraq.
As a first step, they have to dissolve the parliament as a sign of goodwill. We need a national salvation government that can prepare for what's to come, and we also demand elections. But I can tell you that they will not respond to our demands.
He said, take advantage of my presence to fight the corrupt. In God's will, we will get rid of these corrupt and put an end to this black era that the Iraqi people have been living in.
So what do Sadr's opponents think? The Coordination Framework Alliance includes lawmakers from the party of former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. For now, the stance of the framework is divided. They favor a confrontational stance. This includes forming a government and purging Sadr's followers from state agencies. Thousands of their supporters marched through Baghdad. This was in a protest against Sadr's actions. However, the views of another camp within the coordination framework appear to be ascendant. However, Iraqi politics often skirts the edge of the abyss before the actors involved decide to resolve their differences behind closed doors. So a deal could still be possible. Which brings us to the question, how will this threaten Iraq's stability? This depends on what Sadr's opponents do. If they persist, the situation could escalate. Sadrists could paralyze the executive and the capital. But Iran, which backs groups in the coordination framework, doesn't want violence. One of Iran's senior military commanders visited Baghdad a few days ago. Ghani's visit was an effort to keep tensions from escalating. For now, the sides, both heavily armed, appear to be avoiding violence. They are aware of the impact this would have on Iraq and the Shiite majority that was empowered by the political system. But only time can tell what will happen if the situation persists. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
From Iraq to Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, we have a lot more lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, let's take a quick look at what else is making the headlines across the region.
Turkey's inflation jumped to 24-year high of 79.6% in July. It was fueled by the lira's continued decline as well as the economic consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Talks to revive the 2015 nuclear deal between Iran and world powers are set to resume as representatives from Iran and the United States return to Vienna for a new round of discussions. The United Nations says Yemen's warring sides agreed to renew existing truce. Both sides have also agreed to try to arrive at an expanded truce agreement as soon as possible. Kuwait has formally dissolved parliament as the Gulf Arab state's crown prince moves to resolve a standoff between the government and elected parliament. Hezbollah warns Israel against playing with time over maritime border dispute. Hezbollah issued a video showing vessels involved in Israeli offshore oil and gas industry.
On Thursday, Lebanon marked the second anniversary for the Beirut port explosion, one that killed at least 215 people, wounded thousands, and damaged vast areas of the capital I'm currently standing in, Beirut. It was one of the biggest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. But even after 2 years, the calls for justice continue. As you can see behind me, the silos are collapsing from fires, a reminder of the crumbling hope of the Lebanese people. So the main question is, after 2 years, why has no top official been held to account? It was a dark day in Lebanon's history. August 4, 2020. A warehouse in Beirut caught fire. When it tripped through the building, this happened. A huge mushroom cloud engulfed the skies. The massive explosion rang through the city, devastating the Lebanese capital in mere seconds. The fire detonated 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate, a highly explosive material stored in the port. Till date, no one knows why it was there. It was one of the biggest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. In moments, the city resembled a war zone. Over 200 people were killed. At least 5,000 were injured. Chaos and confusion grip the streets. It is a day that Beirut will never forget. But even 2 years later, the fight for justice continues. No top official has been held to account. Lebanon's blast victims wait for answers. One question continues to haunt them. Why did no one warn residents or evacuate them?
This crime lives in the people's conscience. It comes to express 30 years of negligence and mismanagement of public sectors. There was a danger that threatened the whole capital. They all knew about it, but no one took action, as if it was something normal. And this shows how the administration and judiciary in the Lebanese state consider only personal interest and do not think about public interest.
A new issue now is the burning silos. As you can see in the silos behind me, the fires are still burning. A section of the huge grain silos collapsed last week. This was after a weeks-long blaze caused by fermenting grains. These fires have been smoldering for weeks. People are being told to stay indoors, and the smell is spreading to nearby areas. Senior Lebanese officials were aware of the cargo. All of them have denied wrongdoing. This tussle has played out in the courts, in the political life, and on the streets. But 2 years later, the blast is like an open wound, as officials try to close the case. These silos behind me are 50 years old. They are 158 feet high. They once had the capacity to hold over 100,000 tons of grains. These silos withstood the force of the explosion 2 years ago, shielding the western part of Beirut from the blast. Now in April, the government ordered the demolition of the silos, a move that has been met with objections. Families of blast victims want the silos to stay. They want it preserved as a memorial site for the victims. Lebanese leaders promised a thorough investigation into it, but nothing concrete has emerged yet. Why were 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate stored at the port? And why did no one decide to evacuate it for 6 years?
Maybe at the beginning we had hope because it was still the beginning and people were by our side. People were taking to the streets with us more. Now we feel kind of alone. People call us, of course. We know there are people there. But I always say, this is the case of a country, not just a case of 240 or however many victims there are. We don't even know.
2 years on, the devastation is still visible. The investigation into it has flatlined. The perpetrators might escape justice. But away from the burning grain silos, Lebanon remains anguished. Grief and anger grips its citizens every single day. As the crisis-hit nation runs out of time. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One. The COGAT, or the Coordinator of Activities in the Territories. It is a special unit in the Israeli Defense Ministry. Now it is largely concerned with the issuing and the processing of paperwork. This means that basically it approves permits to enter or to travel abroad, mostly for the Palestinians living in the occupied territories. Now the power that the COGAT yields is extraordinary. In recent reports and testimonies, old IDF soldiers suggested the abuse of power and extraordinary control of Palestinian lives. We bring you the story.
It's called the permit regime. For Israel's COGAT, the Palestinians are not people. They are just numbers on a computer. A click of a button controls their future. You click yes and you give them an opportunity to work and travel. You press no and their lives become a little more miserable. It is a regime that rules over occupied territories. The Kogat is part of the Israeli Defense Ministry. It is a unit largely concerned with paperwork and permit. It approves medical and work permits to enter Israel or even travel abroad from the nation. It controls imports and exports, looks after infrastructure and the allocation of natural resources. After the Oslo Accords, most of Kogat's functions were transferred. They were given to the then newly established Palestinian Authority, but the civil administration unit still remained. It kept a tight control over Palestinians in the occupied territories, mainly through the crossing permit system. This means the Kogat controls the lives of Palestinians, and testimonies indicate the vast abuse of power by this unit. The testimonies were published by the Israeli Breaking the Silence group. Here is one of them. An IDF soldier said, and I quote, "We were told in training that everything we were doing for the Palestinians was basically generous, a favor. We didn't question the bigger picture, like why there are no decent hospitals in the territories, so people have to travel," unquote. The testimonies by the IDF veterans have a few things in common. The use of collective punishment, like revoking the travel permit of an entire family, the influence of Israel's settler movement, and baseless blockade of goods in and out of Gaza. Another testimony talked about the enormous access to data. Another IDF soldier said, and I quote, "I could see everything about their lives, families, travel details. Sometimes employers. I remember once my commanding officer pulled up the screen to show me the file of one of the highest-ranking Palestinian officials just for fun. That was mind-blowing," unquote. The testimonies are shocking, but they are not new. It is something that has been a pattern in the occupied territories. The Kogat has denied all such testimonies, rejecting all attempts to cast a doubt on the organization's efforts. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
A line in the sand, a head in the clouds, and a 100-mile linear metropolis of 9 million people, envisioned as a monument of human civilization. This is what Saudi Arabia's NEOM is supposed to be. It is the brainchild of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But is this the future, or is Saudi Arabia building a fantasy? Is NEOM a real estate cliché or a utopia?
An artificial moon, beaches that would glow in the dark, flying taxis, and the world's tallest skyscrapers. This is not a sci-fi novel. It is a city being built deep in Saudi Arabia's deserts. This is NEOM, a mega city in the brainchild of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Imagine a traditional city.
NEOM derives its name from the Greek word for new and the Arabic term for future. It is being built as humanity's next chapter. Once completed, it will be 33 times the size of New York. NEOM is a crucial part of the Crown Prince's 2030 vision, and he has left no stones unturned.
We need to transform the concept of a conventional city into that of a futuristic one. Today, as the chairman of the board of directors of NEOM, I present to you the line, a city of 1 million residents with a length of 170 kilometers that preserves 95% of nature within NEOM, with 0 cars, 0 streets and 0 carbon emissions.
The promotions are eye-catching. 2 mirror-encased skyscrapers, stretching over 120 kilometers. They run across a swathe of desert and mountain terrain, providing a future home for 9 million people. Is this the future of living, or an epic science fiction fantasy? For now, no one is sure. The project sounds so unreal that it almost sounds like an utopian world. Though details are scarce, the line will run entirely on renewable energy. So there will be no roads, no cars and no emissions. Instead, high-speed rail will connect sections of the line. NEOM was first announced in 2017 with much fanfare. It was once touted as a regional Silicon Valley. A biotech and digital hub spread over 26,500 square kilometers, now it is a vehicle for reimagining urban life. The concept has morphed a lot from its early conception. The mega city is likely to contribute $48 billion to the kingdom's GDP. NEOM will also have its own parallel legal system, one that will be separate from the rest of Saudi Arabia. So clearly, the mega city is the futuristic version of paradise. But not everything is going according to plan. Foreign capital has not been forthcoming, but even with its lofty zero-carbon plans, the funds to build NEOM will inevitably require oil wealth. No one knows that better than Saudi Arabia. While it hopes to finish construction of the business zone by 2025, West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Few years ago, you would not have imagined DJs, let alone female ones, in Saudi Arabia. But now they are taking the kingdom by storm, turning their once hidden hobbies into thriving careers. They are performing in gigs everywhere. In our next report, we bring you the story of how these women are shattering the glass ceiling with every beat.
Lane Naif stands behind her control tower with headphones around her neck, shifting smoothly between pop hits and club tracks. The Saudi DJ is playing for a crowd of business school graduates. This subdued scene is a far cry from her original gigs. She has played at the Jeddah Grand Prix. She has played at the Dubai Expo, making her name as a star in the Saudi music circuit. Yet, this gig captures an important milestone. Women DJs were an unthinkable phenomenon in Saudi Arabia until a few years ago. Women were not allowed to perform in the conservative kingdom, but now they've become a relatively common sight. These days they turn few heads, gig after gig, going about making a living from what was once merely a pastime.
I really do believe that women have they have more perspective on this thing, like reading people, because women are like by nature, they're caring by nature, they're mothers, so we do tend to know how to read people. We know where the red flags are, we know how to talk and how to approach the people.
Naif and other female DJs embody two major reforms, championed by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. New opportunities for women and expanding entertainment options, notably music. But it wasn't always smooth sailing for Saudi Arabia's female DJs. They encountered resistance from their families, from customers, and even from music festivals.
For me, I don't really see a difference between genders. And I'm always like open for like both. So it's my music is not for females or for males. It's for music lovers. It's music for the soul. So it really doesn't matter the gender. So I don't see any difference, to be honest.
These women are now taking over the stage across Saudi Arabia. They have platforms where they can play, and their hobbies have turned into careers.
Saudi Arabia's female DJs are now making crowds groove to their tunes, breaking a glass ceiling with every beat. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, and you're watching WION, World is One.